Welcome back, usual suspects, to Hidden Catastrophe Science, Episode 3. In Episode 1, we investigated the origins of a book called The Adam and Eve Story by Chan Thomas. In Episode 2, we discussed how difficult it was to get this book, which we actually did acquire a physical copy and made available on SuspectSky.com. We then covered the first chapter relating to Chan Thomas's interpretation and analysis regarding the frozen woolly mammoths, and we're going to begin this episode picking up right where we left off. In addition to providing the original video file of the actual 1965 copy of the Chan Thomas book, we are including links to a PDF version for your convenience, as well as a 1973 edition to Chan Thomas's work called The Postlude to the Adam and Eve Story. Both of these links are now available, including PDF and video files. We are also now including a 1993 re-edition of the book called Aftermath, which includes a lot of additional information related to the solar influence and the cyclical catastrophe cycle, all of which will be available in their primary source evidence form at SuspectSky.com. Unlike other channels, this channel will be covering what Chan Thomas actually talked about. We will be looking at the words he used and provide an analysis into what we think this individual was trying to say, and we will be doing so for the purposes of this episode using the original 1965 version of Chan Thomas's work, The Adam and Eve Story. We left off talking about the whole process bespeaks of an inhuman supernatural violence in which mammoths, woolly mammoths, were frozen alive, destroyed by cataclysmic level wind, water, and earth migration as part of a crustal displacement event. We are picking up now in the very subsequent paragraph called Where Did the Muck Come From? Where did all this mud come from that apparently destroyed the mammoths and destroyed the world, and according to Chan Thomas, happens every 12,000 years? We talk about how this muck, this mud, can be found in Alaska and northern Siberia. And what is most interesting is that there are strata found in the Grand Canyon and the Badlands that seem to indicate that this event was a very rapid event, that this was not caused by a slow sedimentary process, that this was a rapid event that somehow instilled thousands or millions of tons of soil all at once, which leads to the homogeneity of the strata found in the Grand Canyon as well as the Badlands. So as we move through this presentation, we are going to be summarizing what Chan Thomas was talking about in a way that makes it more accessible to the viewer and the reader. As we move forward, we're going to be moving through paragraph by paragraph, but also skipping various paragraphs that might not lend a lot of information as we move through the postlude to the Adam and Eve story. The next point comes up with the Jura Mountains, which are frankly similar to the Allegheny Mountains in Pennsylvania, which actually I call my home. I actually live around there. What was interesting about this paragraph that Chan Thomas discusses is that there are actually these enormous granite blocks weighing several tons that apparently have been moved from the Alps of Switzerland and deposited some 50 to 80 miles away by some unknown force. This is because the Jura Mountains are non-granitic, meaning that they do not contain the granite required to have produced these granite blocks that are now found there. And Chan Thomas theorizes that some monumental force, either a wave of water, air, or earth, has caused these granite blocks to have been propelled from the Alps of Switzerland and then deposited into the Jura Mountains. The very next paragraph of Chan Thomas's book starts to discuss not only the Jura Mountains and how granite had been deposited there by some sort of supernatural violent force, but also begins to talk about how Dr. Hibben, a professor, talked about there are numerous animal carcasses found preserved in Alaska that appear to be shredded and dismembered, and these animals appear to have been affected by a type of supersonic supersonic wind force. And this sort of forms the basis of Chan Thomas's theory that there potentially could be a crustal displacement that occurs by some form of a trigger that we will be getting into in later episodes that causes this calamity, this catastrophic event that creates 1,000-mile-per-hour winds, that creates tidal waves that are thousands of feet high, that essentially wipes clean the entire Earth. Chan Thomas then begins to talk about the normal daily rotation of the Earth and in association with this to harmonics. Chan Thomas in the next paragraph begins to talk about the Earth's normal daily rotation, but then he continues on to talk about the city of Tiwanaku found in South America. This is a city discovered by the Incas, and a city that was discovered to have lived at 12,500 feet in altitude. What was very fascinating about Tiwanaku is that apparently it potentially had survived the crustal displacement catastrophe, and that it has an oral and written history that has created a literature around what this event was and how we, as a species going forward, can remember it. As part of this history of Tiwanaku, the Tiwanakan literature seems to describe a different type of satellite or moon that seemed to have orbited the Earth as part of the Bodes-Titus relationship. This is an interesting part of the document where they talk about harmonics being involved, and that as part of this research, we should be looking in particular places in our solar system for objects that are predicted by this relationship. Look at, if you're interested in harmonics, if you're interested in the electrical relationship between us, our planet, and the overall solar system, this could be very important information and something that we will actually be revisiting in a future episode of the Hidden Catastrophe Science series. As Chan Thomas discussed harmonics and the electrical influence of the solar system with the planet Earth, he then moves on to talk about Easter Island and Baalbek. These are giant stone statues that apparently have been buried, according to Chan Thomas, in some type of massive mud flow or some type of massive deposit of sediment and water and likely air as a result of the crustal displacement theory. He then moves on to Niagara Falls, which is a very fascinating way, Chan Thomas suggests, of being able to gauge the timelines of when this catastrophe might occur. He discusses that about 4.5 feet per year is eroded away from the Niagara Falls. So if you can imagine the waterfall itself and the point at which the water begins to dump over the side of the cliff, that edge begins to erode 4.5 feet per year. And he uses this, interestingly, as a way to gauge when this catastrophe may have happened, because such a catastrophe would have reset the clock, would have destroyed the Niagara Falls as we know it. And he comes to the conclusion that at least 7,000 years has passed until we've experienced one of these catastrophes. He also does a similar comparison to St. Anthony's Falls in the upper Mississippi River and comes to a very similar conclusion. Chan Thomas then discusses a little bit of the literature and oral history from a biblical sense, where we start to talk about how thousands of years ago, related to Gilgamesh and Noah's flood, and some of the stories that have been passed down generationally between these time periods. And what is interesting is that a number of these stories, from both Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim, and whatnot, they all seem to involve the requirement that a boat is going to be required to survive the next cycle of catastrophe. And he says this provides a very interesting way to pinpoint when these catastrophe cycles actually occur. In future videos, we are going to be not only further summarizing and finishing off this discussion about what Chan Thomas had to say, but we will also be releasing the newest edition of Chan Thomas's work, as well as analysis. We will also be conducting an ethical roundtable about how are we as responsible investigators supposed to handle this information and supposed to disseminate it amongst our communities. But we also Also, and most excitingly, we'll get very into an in-depth investigation of who Chan Thomas actually was and provide you with a complete biography, a complete summary of his work, which actually connects, shockingly, to a number of areas of the conspiratorial world. This story will continue to evolve over time, and I really would like to thank all of you for listening right now, because the rabbit hole continues to get deeper, and we are now just beginning to understand how deeply this individual was involved with the work that apparently has defined our current age. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you again next time.